Hello and welcome back to the Norway Chess, and this is the round that everybody was waiting for, the youngster Alireza FIROUZJA against the world champion Magnus CARLSEN. So a bit about the tournament situation. So right now Magnus CARLSEN is leading, but if Alireza manages to win, then he would immediately overtake CARLSEN. If they make a draw, then they play an Armageddon as they do in this tournament, and then Alireza absolutely must win that Armageddon, and then hope that in the last round CARLSEN makes some mistakes, and then Alireza would have some chance to catch him. If the classical game is decided by CARLSEN's victory, that immediately sort of ends the tournament, and then CARLSEN would be crowned to be the winner. So let's directly go to the game. So Alireza is with the white pieces and CARLSEN is with the black pieces, and we had a Reti opening. Bishop g2, knight c6, castles e5, e4, d6, and c3. And as a matter of fact, this is known to be kind of a drawish line. So comes g6, d4, takes, and bishop g4. And after d takes c, knight c3, it is quite likely that the queens are going to be traded on the d file, and then the endgame is going to be, well, more or less equal. So let's see how the game goes. So this is bishop g7, h3, bishop f3. Now white takes on d8, bishop takes back, bishop f3, castles, and king g2. And let's now stop for a second to estimate the position. So white has the two bishops, which is a very nice thing to have. But at the same time, black has quite some advantage in developing. Right now there is good control over the d file. The black knight is also going to jump to d4, so this d4 square is pretty much under the control of black. And well, white has the d5 square for himself, but right now the d5 square is actually quite well controlled by this knight. So all what white has at this point is the bishop pair, but it still looks a little bit better for white. So here comes the move knight d4, and well, Alireza was thinking quite a lot here, and he made a quite a strange choice. So the most natural move in this position, it's not only to me but also the commentators, especially Vladimir Kramnik, was also emphasizing, would be just to play bishop d1. This bishop looks quite strange at first, but it controls very many squares, very many very important squares, and then white would have the chance to develop his bishop, put his rook to c1. If has to, he can play the move f3 to protect his pawn. So that would have been by far the best choice. So let's say black plays b5, white can just play f3 and then go on with this plan and then see what happens. Of course, black has a nice counterplay. This d4 knight is beautiful, so I wouldn't say that black is doing any worse, but the game is at least interesting, and white has the long-term perspective with the bishops. And as I mentioned you before, so Alireza actually needs to play for a win. A draw is not going to help a lot FIROUZJA here. And therefore he played a very strange move. He played with bishop g5. So pretty much seems like that he only goes for the draw. So comes h6, bishop f6, and then the position becomes pretty symmetric. Opposite colored bishops, there is a d4 square and a d5, the 4 knight. White has the chance to either jump in or go for the exchange of this these pieces with knight e2. So the position looks quite equal, and comes a strange decision. So once you play bishop g5, you basically say that you are happy with the draw, which is a strange decision from Alireza, but of course he's playing as the world champion, so would be pretty much understandable to just make a draw, try to win in Armageddon, and then let's hope that something miraculous happens next day in the final round. So the logical continuation of the bishop g5 would be just play rook d1, go for knight e2, and then quickly go home, essentially with a draw. Which means also you go home but then return for the Armageddon. But after bishop f6, he played the move knight d5, and frankly after rook d6, it's quite clear that the only one who could be ever better is going to be black. So black will try to restructure his pieces, bishop d8, maybe push for some f5, maybe put the rook on the 6th rank to put some pressure against these pawns. Black can also just put his rook on c8 and try to invade on the c file. So yeah, the position is still very much equal, but doesn't go in the right direction for Alireza. So comes rook c1, bishop d8, rook f d1, king g7. And here Alireza plays the move knight e3, with hints toward redirecting the knight to c4, but frankly the knight is doing worse on c4 than it was on d5. So it's again some sort of small mistake from Alireza. Comes rook a6, a3, h5, knight c4, bishop f6, and probably with knight c4, Alireza's idea was to sooner or later sacrifice the exchange on d4. So let's say comes h4, rook c8. Now the rook takes d4 seems to be a very given move. However, it's actually not so easy. So after e takes d4, I suggest you that to white plays e5, and I suggest that you stop the video here and try to give start to create some sort of chances for black here. So actually, what's going on here? So while playing the move e5, there is obviously a threat of taking the bishop, but there is also a threat of playing bishop takes b7, which is also a double attack. But black has a very nice way to continue the game, which is play the move rook c7, as mentioned by Carlsen in the interview. If you take an f6, king takes back, and white has quite some problems that he's pretty much pinned along this c file. There is a threat of playing b5 at some point, and well, the position is not looking promising for white, so it's pretty hard to defend. So now he has to play something like rook c2, and white could also play something like d3 maybe. So it could be d3, rook c, for maybe b5 even, and then well, black has quite some chances. So for that reason, actually, Alireza didn't even enter this line. So again, he played for something that he never really did. So he started to regroup again and played the move knight e3. Now comes rook c6, exchanging rook d3, bishop goes back. The bishop would be quite nice piece on this diagonal. That's what Carlsen tries to achieve. White bishop goes back as well. Bishop b3, b5, rook d1, rook goes back. So actually in this position it would have also been quite interesting to just take the piece. So knight takes b3, rook d8, and then say rook b1. So I'm attacking the pawns. But also white has quite some counterplay. You can play rook d7 or put rook b8. So there is quite some counterplay to for white as well. So for that reason, Carlsen decided, well, let's just go back and try to push further in this ending. Comes bishop e2, quite some maneuvering moves. So black's idea is to put his pawns on light squares, which looks quite counterintuitive because then the white bishop can attack them. But if you put your pawns on light squares, that means that your opponent puts his pawns on dark squares, which would be good for your bishop. And of course, if you want to play for a win, then that's something that you have to do. So comes king f1, bishop b6, rook c3. And while rook c3 is of course pretty much trying to bail out because you are ruining your own pawn structure. Of course, he takes, knight b3, king e1, bishop c5, knight c2. And here in this position, the best play would have been, well, realizing that actually white is pretty much stalemated. So you cannot really take on b3 because the pawn takes back and this pawn goes in. You cannot really move this knight anywhere because your pawn is going to hang. You can't play king e2 because you are going to lose your bishop with knight c1 check. So white is pretty much stalemated. So one thing that black could have done is just immediately go for f5, e takes, f, e takes, then push e4, bring up the king and slowly win the game. So f5 looks pretty close to winning actually in the ending. But Carlsen decided, well, he has already done enough and he's about to win the game anyway with the move knight c1. But the problem with knight c1 is that comes bishop d5, and after knight d3, king e2, knight f2, this is how the game went. It seems that black just won a pawn and he's doing very well, but now comes the counterplay from Alireza. Plays the move bishop c6. So attacking this pawn, and after f6, he just plays the move knight e3, attacking this knight, and you can't really take because then your knight is going to be very much out of play. White is going to take these pawns, and actually it's white who is winning now. So you can't do that, and now your knight is hanging. You have to make the move knight h1 attacking this pawn, but now white can also play knight f1, and it's clear that these pawns are going to be taken. After bishop takes, bishop b2 takes, there is well, only pawns on one side and opposite colored bishops, so white chances of making a draw is incredibly high. Comes bishop d4, and again you can eliminate one more pawn. It's always a good idea to eliminate pawns if you are done in an ending. So this happened, and the game looks pretty drawish. But of course, yeah, and one more thing that I haven't mentioned is that Alireza was playing very slow. So here he only had like a minute left, while Carlsen had an hour or so on his clock. So there's still some chances for Carlsen, especially because of the clock situation, but otherwise the position is pretty drawish. So white plays knight g3, maybe puts the bishop on this diagonal, and try to plus h5, exchanging even more pawns, leading to a pretty short draw. So the game still goes on. Some maneuvering. Of course, black doesn't exchange the knights because this ending is just completely draw. The opposite colored bishop, so tries to keep at least some pieces on the board. Yeah, this is the one more crucial position. So here black played a pretty tricky move, bishop c3. We will see what the idea in the game is. So bishop e1 is the threat, and well, h5 is not a bad move, but as Kramnik pointed out in the analysis, he said that the easiest would be just play king e2, avoid the white bishop coming to e1. Next move is indeed h5, and there's not much black can do about this. But Alireza was a little bit impatient, and he played the move h5 that allowed one more trick for Carlsen. He played the move bishop e1 with the idea that when you take on g6, then black can take this, and this ending is still a little bit tricky for white. So black plan is to somehow reroute the knight, take this pawn, and then try to do something in this ending when he's up a pawn, but it looks pretty drawish. So comes king g5, going around. Actually, in this position, white could have just tried to play king e3, not even allowing the black knight to go back easily to this h5 pawn. So it's not very clear what Carlsen could have done here. So you have to somehow maneuver your knight over the king side to take the pawn, but it's not clear how you can actually achieve that. But Alireza played the move king g3, that should also be well enough for a draw. Knight e2, king f3, knight f4. And here in this position, there's actually a very easy way to make a draw. So I invite you again to stop the video and try to figure out. So the sort of problem for white is that black takes this pawn and then tries to somehow maneuver his knight back and then go around his king and then all the way up, and then something happens. Or not. Probably there's still a draw. But one way you can defend this is just sacrificing your pawn with h6, with the idea if black takes, then you put your king on g4, try to enter on f5, and again there is not much black can do here. So once the white king goes to f5 and tries attacking these pawns, the black army will be just pretty much occupied with trying to hold the white king back, and not much chance of making progress with his plan. So that would have been a very simple draw. But here is a played move king g3, and here black takes with a check on h5. And so again, you can make a move like king f3 and basically say that still black has not much of a way to make a progress here. Well, he would probably try to again reroute his king, but once you do something like this, we put our king on g for f5, and it's not clear how black can make any further progress here. But Alireza decided that, well, the pawn endgame is also drawn. It's actually, so it takes on h5, and actually is not from the pawn ending, is drawn. So comes king h5, king h3, but he has very little time, and in this pawn ending, Carlsen can be very tricky. So let's see what happens. King h6. So an important rule in pawn endings is that you try to oppose the opponent's king, so that then you can sort of shoulder the opponent sort of back. So comes king h4, king j7, king g3. Again, important, you don't go to g4. I mean, the problem is that comes king g6, and then again it's black who is opposing, black will either be able to go up, or if you go there comes f5 and you are losing immediately. So for that reason you play the move king g3, and if your opponent happens to play king g6, then again opposition king g4. So comes king f8, and now black's plan is to go all the way there. Comes king f2, king e7, king e2, king e8, king e3. So this is the so-called distant opposition, sort of, but it's not yet that necessary. So you can also just move around with your king. At this point, it's nothing really loses. But he plays king d3, king d6, and now it comes once again that the kings are close to each other. It's again very important how you defend. So again, I invite you to stop the video and try to find the only drawing move here. So again, as I told you before, the way to defend is going to be by distant opposition. So the best move here is king d2. But you can also reach to this move that this is basically the only one that's not losing. So the problem, if you start going to king e3, king e2, then obviously the black king comes in and then you are losing. That's pretty clear. So you can't really do that. You can't play king c4, because then the black king all of a sudden goes back, pushes f5, and you are again losing, because king d3, well, it's actually not f5 that you are losing by, but the black king can also just go back. It's not f5, sorry, but you're not going to be on time. Black is going to enter. King g3, king g5, and black is going to enter, so you are losing again. So king c4 is again not the move to defend. So the move to defend is king d2, with the idea if you play black plays king c5, then you are opposing again, and you are good. So king d2 is the good move, and the move that Alireza played is unfortunately king c3, or unfortunately for him, but fortunate for Carlsen fans and Magnus Carlsen himself, because after king c3, the very straightforward king c5 opposition, and that's all she wrote. Black is simply winning. You cannot defend anymore. If you go this way, the black king is in. If you go this way, the black king is going to get in here. And there's not much you can do. Black is going to take the pawn and escort in his two pawns. So that's what happened. King c5. I'm not sure where Alireza resigned. I think Alireza resigned immediately after king c5, because there's not much you can do here with white. That's it. So yeah, Magnus Carlsen won the game pretty much unexpectedly. I mean, he was doing well in the game, but apart from some point in the endgame when there was all the pieces up, somewhere around here, he had some chances to just improve. I told you with f5, but after knight c1, again seemed like that the game is going to be a draw. But yeah, this didn't happen. Alireza was probably a bit too impatient in trying to make the draw. He was also maybe too excited, I would say. But this is the first time he really goes into such a high level tournament and he has a chance to win. So yeah, this is actually what happened. It was a very interesting endgame as well. You can learn a lot from the endgame as well. And well, congratulations to Magnus Carlsen. He won yet another tournament. Who knows actually how many he has won already in this year. Seems to be just winning everything. He was also winning a lot of rating points again. So yeah, that's it. And round 10 has not much interest in terms of who's winning the tournament, but there still could be quite some interesting games, especially Carlsen with white against Aronia. Probably Carlsen is going to go at Aronia's throat, because Aronia is not doing that well in the tournament, so that could be an interesting game. So I will probably cover that as well. So see you there.